Good evening, Your Excellencies, and national focal points and other interested ISA stakeholders. It's wonderful to have you join us here for our first ISA webinar. I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this, our first step in rolling out our Star-C network. Without much further ado, I will now hand over to Antoine and Fred from the French National Institute of Solar Energy and the East African Centre for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency.
Hello, everyone. So I will start the presentation. My name is Antoine Dizier, and I say by Fiona, I work at the National Institute for Solar Energy in France. And I will start this nice webinar on the global energy market with, of course, a deep focus on global solar market. So the first part will be about understanding the main data available about global solar market, both technical data on installed capacity, but also about economic data on price and main costs of global solar system. So let's start with a global overview of today global energy supply. This is a very nice curve from IEA, the International Energy Agency, from 2018, so 2 years ago. That's the latest data on global energy supply. Here you see global energy supply by the different sources of primary energy. So you have, of course, fossil fuels, coal, oil and natural gas that account for almost 80% of global energy supply worldwide. There are many interesting facts that we can have a look on this curve. First one, as I just mentioned, the majority of our global energy supply today is done by fossil fuels. So the global energy supply, I would say, have two main issues, two main carbon issues. The first issue is, of course, climate change, because fossil fuel, by making combustions of carbon, are producing CO2, carbon dioxide, that increase global warming at the world scale. So that's the main issues for the global energy supply. And the second issues, I would say, will be that these fossil fuels are by definition fossil, and their availability on Earth are given once a time. So we might see in the next decades some global constraints of fossil fuels supplies, especially with oil. As maybe you might know, the International Energy Agency has announced 2 years ago that the global peak oil for conventional oil has been passed in 2008, so almost 12 years ago. And now the global oil demand is only increasing through non-conventional oil products, such as schist oil or other oil in Canada, for instance. So we might have in the next years some global issues about oil demand and further about natural gas and coal as well. So there is an absolute necessity of switching this energy supply to renewable energies and low carbon energies, such as for the global energy supply, nuclear, wind energy, biofuels, and of course, solar energy. On this graph, you have the solar part, which is in yellow on this curve. So you see it is still a very tiny part of global energy supply. Now we will, in this webinar, focus on solar photovoltaics. And solar photovoltaics produce, of course, electricity. So let's have a look now on the global electricity power generation worldwide. So there is quite a different graph for the global power demand. You see that the majority or a large part of global power generation is made by coal, almost 40%. And there is still a large part of oil and natural gas as well. The three fossil fuels account for about 60% of global power generation to produce electricity. So the global electricity mix in the world is still dominated by fossil fuels. Next, you have some other low carbon power generation systems, such as nuclear and hydropower. And you have also the tiny parts below, which is wind energy in blue, and the solar electricity production in purple. So this tiny part for solar it looks quite tiny, but in reality, when we will have a look at more concrete solar data, the growth of this market is dramatic, and it follows a nice exponential curve. So on the power generation, this is the global mix at a global scale, but of course it depends heavily on the global mix in each country. So some countries have a lot of hydropower potential, so they have a very low carbon mix. Some other heavily depends on oil or natural gas, or even coal, which is the case in China, for instance, India, or either USA or Germany. So this gives us quite interesting information about global economy of a country, especially if we look into details about its energy and power generation mix. So that was for giving you overall data on the global energy and electricity generation data. So now let's focus on solar energy, which accounts, I repeat, for a tiny part, but the growth is, of course, dramatic. So this is a nice curve when we can learn a lot of things about the global renewable power generation market. This curve is extracted from IRENA report from 2019, so 1 year ago. So it's quite recent data. There are four curves that we can look into details. First, the blue curves, which is the upper one, gives you the renewable capacity change as a percentage of the global capacity change. So it means that if you have, for instance, in 2018, you have 63% of renewable capacity change as a percentage of global capacity. It means that for 100% of new capacity in 2019, 63% of this new capacity is from renewables. And it means that 37% of other capacity is from fossil fuels power production. So it means that since, well, say 4 to 5 years, each year we can install more capacity which is from renewables than capacity that is for fossil fuels. And that's quite a good news. And we should increase this percentage further on, as we know climate change issues and peak oil also issues. And if you look 10 years back ago, in 2010, for instance, you see that the renewable capacity change was only 38%. So it means that 10 years ago, we were still installing a lot of fossil fuel capacity, especially coal power system in developing countries. So with time, And with the reduction of cost in most of renewable systems, we are now able to install more renewable capacity each year than fossil fuel capacity. That was for the blue curve, which gives you interesting inputs on the global market. Now, if we look at the red and the gray curve, the red curve gives you the renewable power as a percentage of global capacity. So if you look at the data in 2018, we have 33%. It means that global capacity is made by 33% of renewables and 67% of fossil fuel capacity. This is the global installed capacity, whereas the blue curve was the annual added capacity. The red curve is a percentage of global capacity, so it's in power. Now, if we look at the energy production, in 2018, if we look at the gray curve, then we have 26% of global power generation, which was from renewable capacity. So the difference between the red curve and the gray curve is just that we go through power into energy. And most of the time, the fossil fuel power system will produce more hours during the year than the renewable capacity. And if we look at solar now, the yellow curve here is the percentage, the solar power as a percentage of global power generation. So if we look still at the 2018 solar capacity, we can say that solar is generating 2.2% of global energy, global electricity power generation. And this data should be increased in 2020. So I'm pretty sure we are close to 3% now in 2020 or at the end of 2020. So this curve is growing dramatically in the next year, and this is a good hope for global electricity system in the world. Let's have a focus on solar photovoltaics now, about power generation. If you remember, we have a very tiny portion of global power generation. We could see on the graph from the IEA, the International Energy Agency. But if we zoom at only the solar data, we can see this dramatic growth, this exponential growth, starting approximately from 2000, the year 2000, and growing and growing in the last years. And the perspective for solar PV market is that this growth will be keep going in the next decades. So in 2018, solar PV generation accounted for about 5,100 gigawatt hour, which is, for giving you an example, approximately the electricity consumption in France. So global solar photovoltaics generation is approximately equals, maybe 1 to 2 years ago, to the global power demand in France. So it's quite a nice market to be in, and this growth is going to keep increasing in the next years. This was for solar generation. Now we can take another graph for the global capacity to have a nice look on how solar account for this new capacity. So here is the added capacity in 2018. So the newly installed power capacity in the world. So you see that in 2018, more than half of the new capacity were from solar and wind energy. And we can also see that still 2 years ago, we'll install about 20% of the old capacity with coal power production. So if we count all renewables in this nice graph, which are large hydro, other renewables, which can be biofuel, for instance, solar, PV, and wind. We account for 64% of global capacity. That's the data we have already talked about. So that's a nice thing to remember. For 2 to 3 years, each year on Earth, we install more than 100 gigawatts of solar electricity. Okay, maybe before continuing on this presentation, maybe the Indian Ministry of Energy would like to have some words on this presentation. I don't know how to deal with it. Fiona, can you help me on this? Otherwise, we can maybe we can wait for the end of the first part. So we have quite a number of minutes that can be allowed for the Indian Ministry of Energy to have some words. So let's go back to this global market, and especially solar. This graph is the latest data on global solar market, and it illustrates the annual solar added capacity as a percentage for each part of the world. So you can see that in the very first years of the solar market, from year 2000 to maybe 2010, the main continent which were part of solar market were mostly Europe and America. But since 10 years ago, other markets have starting booming, and especially the market in Asia and East Pacific countries, and of course, especially in China, where the growth is dramatic. And now China accounts for almost half of each year added capacity in terms of solar photovoltaics power generation. So it's interesting to see that now in 2018, but I think it's quite the same this year in 2020, we have almost 2/3 of global solar market that is driven by China, Southeast Asia countries, and more Middle East and Africa countries. And I think that the MEA, so Middle East and Africa solar market, will dramatically grow in the next decades as well as the China market was in the past years. That was the solar added capacity each year. So if we do the sum each year of each capacity, we can have the global installed capacity. So a nice data to remember, it's now each year we install worldwide about 100 gigawatts of solar capacity. And in 2018, we had a little bit more than 500 gigawatt of installed capacity. So if we had 100 gigawatt in 2019 and one other gigawatt in 2020, which is reasonable, we should be at the end of 2020 around 700 gigawatts of installed capacity. Maybe a little bit less due to COVID crisis, but we should be in this number. So you see that now the global installed capacity is approximately half Europe, America, and half South Asia, China, and Middle East Africa countries. And the share of the market from Asian countries and African countries should be growing in the next years. What about the prospects? Because we have talked about data in the past. but the IEA, the International Energy Agency, is also, as many other institutions, which has an expertise in energy. The IEA is making some prospections in the next years, and especially for solar energy, which is a growing market. So you can see here that in the year around 2020, we find back our number of around 700 gigawatts of installed capacity, which is increasing year to year. And the prospects from IEA is that in 2030, we will have more than 3,000 gigawatts of installed capacity. That means multiplying by more than 4 the installed capacity that we have today in about 10 years. So it's a dramatic growth, of course. We have talked about technical data concerning solar market. Now let's have a look on economic data concerning especially PV modules, which accounts for almost half of all system costs. Here you have the latest curve from ITRPV 2020. This is the average module price as a function of global PV module shipments. So it means global and power solar capacity. What we can see that the decrease of module costs are exponential, and that the costs of module, which were around $150 for each watt peak in 1976, now in 2018 are around 25 cents per watt peak, which is a dramatic reduction of module price. And this cost reduction also allows the solar PV markets to boom, and it will boom in the next years. This was only for module costs, but in a solar PV system, you have a lot of components, not only PV modules, of course, but you have also inverters that can convert the DC current into AC current. You have, of course, some racking and mounting to support the PV modules. You can have other balance of system components. And of course, you have some costs for developing and installing PV system, which are accounting at EPC costs. And you can have also other taxes or other costs. So this cost gives you the global solar system costs as a function of the year. So this graph from Irina as well account for the cost, the evolution of the cost, the global system cost from 2009, and it gives you a prospect until 2025. So if we look at the data of 2020, this year, we can see that the light blue part is the module costs, and maybe accounts for 30 to 40% of all system costs. And then you have quite a lot of cost also for installation and racking and balance of system hardware, such as cables or other components. So the reduction of costs is not only due to module costs, is also due to other component reduction. The main reduction accounts for the installation and EPC costs, because in the last 10 years we have we were able to reduce a lot the installation cost, mainly due to the growth of projects that now account for more than the megawatt scales, and before it was more at the 10 kilowatt scales. So that was for system costs. And what an interesting data also that can allow us to compare different power generation systems is what we call the electricity generation costs. or LCOE. Maybe you heard of it before. So it's the levelized cost of electricity, and it's the unit is US dollar or any price unit per megawatt hour. So it's all the costs of the installation from the start of the project to the very end of the project, divided by all the production that can produced by a solar system. So it gives you the electricity generation costs that needs to be get if you want economic performance to be okay. So what you can see on this curve from an analysis from a famous consulting firm Lazar in 2018 is that the LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity of solar in yellow, is decreasing a lot, mainly due to cost reduction, whereas for other power generation system, the LCOE is quite constant. So now, in most of countries with a good irradiation data, such as Africa, Middle East, or Asian countries, as well as Southern Europe, we have solar systems that are economically competitive to other power generation systems, such as coal system, nuclear system, or wind energy. So it's a very nice field to be working is that the global solar market now is competitive with other power generation system. So it will also encourage financial system to build and develop more and more solar energy. Now to finish on this solar global market analysis, we can have a look on what are the main PV technologies that are used in the world. You have actually 3 generations of technologies. The first generation is what we call crystalline silicon technologies. You have monocrystalline and multicrystalline, and these account for about 95% of the global market. So most of the global solar market today is driven by crystalline silicon cells. These technologies has around 18 to 21% efficiency for industrial processes. The efficiency that you see on this graph from Fraunhofer is efficiency in laboratory. So you have to decrease this efficiency if you go through the industrial process. So we are between 18 and 21% for crystalline silicon technologies. The second generation is called thin film, and there are 3 main technologies, which are CIGS, CDTE, and amorphous silicon. This technology are part of maybe 4 to 5% of global market, and they are used for very specific application because you can produce flexible cells, for instance. And it's also technologies that are better performance under hot temperature and diffuse irradiation. Now, last generation is a very, very, very tiny part of global market. It's not at a global scale for industrial process. We have organic cells, organic modules, and also perovskite modules that start to be developed and have a promising efficiency. That was for the global solar technology market. And to finish with, and to do a little transition with my colleague Fred part, we have a nice global off-grid solar market, which is booming in part of the world, and especially in Africa. So the global off-grid market is very, very relevant because you still have a lot of people who lack electricity or who are connected to a non-reliable solar grid. So there is a huge interest in developing this kind of off-grid system where the conventional grid cannot provide the electricity. And what is interesting that the financial sector starts to be interested in this kind of off-grid system, and that is why the off-grid solar system market have a strong growth trajectory, and it will help millions of people to have access to electricity. And we have talked about the global solar market, and now it's of great interest to focus more on one specific market. And now we will focus on the East African solar market with my colleague Fred. So Fred, if you want to start. Maybe if the Indian Ministry of Energy wants to... Yeah, sorry, Fred.
You're able to see now my screen?
Yes, sure. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, Antoine, for the presentation that you've had in the previous few minutes. Unfortunately, I was having some challenge to join, but good, I'm here. So I'll just take a few minutes to take you through the perspective of solar PV in the East African region. So looking at the slide that I've just projected, I'll just take you through each of the graphs that you can see there. On the top left side, we have the graph showing the regional perspective in terms of population. As you can see, we have 6 countries in the East African community region, and 3 of the countries, they have quite similar population regime. And then the 3 others also, they have quite similar regime, with Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda having a population of over 45 million each, and Burundi, Rwanda, and South Sudan having a population of less than 14 million each. So combined in the region, we have a combined population of over 180 million. Sorry, I'm having a challenge here. Yeah, we have a total population of more than 190 million in the region. The generation also varies quite similar to the population regime. You can see Kenya from the graph below that, generating to a total of about 2,700 megawatts, followed by Tanzania and Uganda, which are very close, with over 1,500 megawatts of installed capacity. Then followed by the remaining 3, and you can see also the perspective with the population, with less than 250 megawatts each. And when we look at the situation in terms of the access rates, the graph that is on the top right side, it shows the population, the access rates, and ranging from 2010 all the way to 2019. The blue one is for 2010. We have the orange one is for 2015, the gray one for 2017, and the yellow one for 2019. The general perspective you find in these countries in the East African region is that there is a gradual increase in access rates in all the countries. All the countries are striving to have their population access electricity. And looking at them also, we have countries that lead us, and of course other countries that are following up. in terms of access, with Kenya and Tanzania, together with Uganda and Rwanda having access rates of over 50%, both on-grid and off-grid. Then when you look at the GDP also, that is quite indicative of what we have seen. Just to go back, is that the average access for the region is about 47.6%, both off-grid and on-grid. And this shows that there is quite a huge potential for us to go in and support this effort through off-grid, which are currently the more reliable and cost-effective ways to access, especially very rural communities. The GDP also is quite reflective of the population, as you have seen, and also the generation capacity. So the region in general has been working hard to put good environment for renewable energies as a whole to be adopted as one of course, the ways to try also and fulfill the international, the global agenda, and also the national agendas. There is a lot of reforms that have been happening in the previous years, and that's why we've also been able to see increase in population, in connection also with increase in access rates. It means that there's a lot of work that is going on in the region. So there are a lot of instruments that have been put in place in each country. Some having quite comprehensive instruments in relation to policies, laws, plans, and also strategies, and particularly to promote investment in solar PV market. We have seen also some countries in the region that have had formulation of renewable energy feed-in tariffs, and also having PPS structures, especially for utility scale renewable energies, including PVs and also mini-grid systems. So generally, what we have seen in the ESC region and the countries that are associated to the ESC is that most of them, they have really put quite some good focus in enabling environment for allowing electricity sector to thrive in the region. Yeah, so we have quite a number of players in the region, and we can categorize them generally in 4 categories. We have government as one of the key players in the region. And of course, the government has quite an important role, especially to set policies, to set regulations, laws, and structures that enables thrive of solar PV market in the region. We have also seen governments that have also played a very important role to provide financing to some of the solar PV projects that have been going on in the region through the agencies, specialized agencies for promoting renewable energy access, especially in rural areas, and also from direct mainstream government. Yeah, we have the private sector, which is also a very key player in the market, because of course the importance is very clear. These are the people, these are the organs that makes work done, especially when you put a conducive environment to them, then they take opportunity of that, and of course do the actual development, actual investment in this region. So we have seen basically quite a large percentage of projects that have been championed by private sector in the region, both especially the mini-grid sector, and also some of the utility scale solar PV plants in the region. Yeah, we have development partners and NGOs quite instrumental in providing support, even in policy development. And sometimes they provide grants for development of solar PV projects. Among many other things, they are quite instrumental also as stakeholders in the solar PV market. And we can't forget, of course, the academia. This is a hub for knowledge for players in the region, and they also are considered very key in enabling the thriving of solar PV market in the East African community. Just to share with you that off-grid market in the East African region is growing, and growing very fast, and especially we have seen this in some of the leading countries that I've just mentioned above, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, having the market very vibrant. The only thing that has also been happening though is that challenge of access of finance has delimited that growth that we would have expected to come by. But on a better side is that there's quite a lot of activities happening, quite a lot of new innovations coming with the new financial and business models, which have really helped to increase adoption of solar PV systems in our region. So in the region, we have quite a variety of products that are in the market, ranging from quite a very small product, especially solar as the initial entrant is to provide lighting, all the way to bigger systems that are even connected and supplying to the grid. This is just to show the general architecture in relation to the technologies in terms of size of the systems that are available in our market today. When you look around in the region, we have, I can say, 4 main categories of solar PV systems installed in the market, ranging from very small systems, as I mentioned, pico lamps that just provide basic lamp and mostly some accessories that can be used for charging phones and very simple light applications. Just higher than that, we have smaller solar home systems. Quite some systems with some additional functionalities. You are able to connect slightly bigger gadgets like a television. You are able to connect a radio in it and a few other appliances. And of course, can also be able to light 2 or 3 more rooms at home. Then we have larger solar home systems, mostly used by those who also want to be slightly independent sometimes from the grid. We have seen these systems in our market, and they are growing, especially in those off-grid areas. Then we have mini-grid systems, quite important, especially in off-grid areas, and providing very important energy resource for productive energy uses. Some of them, of course, are larger ones. Some of them are utility scale, and they feed their power to the grid. So this slide basically try to highlight the kind and the quality of products that we are having in the market in the region. We have all the varieties basically classified into 3 main broad categories. That is off-grid brand. Then we have branded retail products, and also we have branded service level products. And this is under the category of those smaller systems, Pico and solar home systems. When we look at the branded off-brand products. Mostly, they are very low cost. And this enables quite a big population to be able to access. You find that usually they have no brand name, and their specifications indicated to the product sometimes resembles specifications that you can find on high quality branded products. Unfortunately, sometimes those specifications that are provided are misleading because they might not be meeting the quality standards, international quality standards required. And in addition, most of them, they degrade very fast, or they have very short lifespan. But that is how the market is. There are products that are available in our market. Then we have branded retail. These usually branded products. And in many cases, they're quite reputable, and they resemble high-quality products also sold through some reputable companies. And with these branded retail products, you find that the retailers, they sell good brands, but now they don't follow up with maintenance. There's no after-sale service, in other words. Compared now to the branded service level, where the operator is the one distributing actually, and also they follow up, they provide after sale service. And usually these products, because of the quality, sometimes the prices are slightly high compared to the upper ones. Price due to quality, and also the services that are rendered after the product has been sold off. So generally, the price is usually driven by quality. That is something that we have generally seen in the market. The quality, the warranty that is provided, which gives you some kind of comfort that the product can serve you for a specific period of time without any problem. And also the after-sale services that are offered. So just to link with the last comment point that I mentioned on the branded service level products. So with basically growth in mobile money penetration and distribution, we have a lot of solar home system sale, and of course driven by now pay-as-you-go system, that you go with the product with minimal amount of money, then you keep paying for a specific period of time. So it releases the
With my apologies, we appear just to have lost Fred quickly. What I will do while we are just reconnecting him is that I'll ask Antoine if he could perhaps start answering some of the questions and answers. Some of the questions, he'll start answering them that attendees have been presenting. No, we have Fred back online.
Yes, sorry. I think something happened on my internet tripled.
That's okay, Fred. It's great to have you join us. I'll put you back on now.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No apologies.
Technical issues always.
Yeah.
Okay, let me proceed from where I left. Can you see my screen? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can, Fred.
Okay, great. Yeah. So a minute. Let me put on presentation mode. Yeah. So sorry about that. So lastly, I'll just like to say that the distribution channel also in the region is being enhanced with new models, but predominantly distribution channel is well developed in densely populated areas other than less dense population areas. In other words, is distribution channel is better in urban environment than in rural settlement where this energy is so much needed. So in terms of looking at the mini grid architecture in the region, we find that also we have quite a number of models that have continued to come up in our region. And the models that are coming up generally varies depending on the size of the system, the type of ownership of the mini grid system, sometimes the management structure, and also the customer base. Usually ownership and management of distribution and generation assets may be done sometimes by the government, you find private sector sometimes, or community based. And we have quite new ownership and management systems that are coming up, kind of a hybrid sometimes, government or community and all that coming up in recent days. Yes, surely customers also may include households, small businesses, large organizations, and sometimes a mix owns these mini grids are set up. And just to mention that we have generally predominantly government-led systems or installations that are happening, or private-led installation, though community-led are also there, but in few numbers. You don't often find them. So when you look at the government-led kind of market, you find that usually the government identifies the site and puts up the tender, the public tender, where private sector usually comes in. Or sometimes you find the government allocating a territory, and of course through the regulation that they are put, setting it clear that private sector can come and develop those areas. So in such kind of systems, usually you find that government provides the subsidies. We have finances also coming from loans or guarantees, or even sometimes direct funding. And one of the good things is that with this system is that they are well regulated, and their tariffs usually are tried to, the government tries to couple it with the tariffs that are available to the main grid that they extend through areas that grid can easily be extended. Then we have a private-led market. This market usually is identified and developed by the operator, but usually is within the regulations that have been set by the government, and sometimes they require licensing before development is done. And we have seen quite various also ways of financing in our region. We've seen equity, where we have the equity funds put and then the system is developed. We have seen also, as I mentioned, non-governmental organization and development partners being important also in providing grants for development of such kind of systems. And also loans have also played a very important role in financing. Both through development financing and also some of them even get commercial loans from local banks. So usually under the private sector-led market, because of course profit also at the end of it all needs to be realized. Usually the tariff should cover all the costs of the mini-grid system, plus some marginal operation costs that will come by together with a little margin of profit. So usually the mini-grids in ESC, in many cases, I can say, they are public-driven, that the government allots areas or identify and through their agencies puts up tenders for private sector to come and develop. So some of the benefits that come with this is that especially when the government puts up a lead in development of this mini-grids, they enable clear planning in different territories. They also help in de-risking some of these projects by, of course, making it clear or predictable how the grid is going to extend to such like areas when there's need for grid extension. And also they try to make the utility cheaper, sometimes by providing subsidies and any other benefits that can make the tariffs low. So we've also seen some increase, some good increase in productive use of energy in our region, in the East African community. Quite a number of companies are coming up with very strong business models on especially productive use. And just to be brief on this slide, because of time, is that productive uses have been relevant in quite a number of sectors in the region. And of course, with also various scale of solar PV installations, starting from very small systems that even provide lighting that extends the hours of businesses to run, and also time for students to attend to their school activities, to larger systems that even are able to do some commercial activities, like in hotels, in hairdressing activities, large cooling systems for milk and fruits in some communities, among many others. So there's a lot of initiative that is going on, especially to have these systems provide some extra income to the ones who are installing or to the users. Yeah, generally, the solar home system and PICO systems in the region, they have been quite here for some time, and we can say that they are quite improved structures in their market, and also we can say that their market is near or at maturity stage, that most of them are able to get even small financing. We have seen some local banks, some local SACCOs providing finances for installation of these small systems. But when you look at larger systems, they are still in early stage. When you look at the utility scale and also mini grids, You find because of the cost implications, some of them, they require kind of equity investment and also some grants. Some of them also require subsidies. Some issues that most of the governments are still working along to see how best they can provide such kind of support. Affordability is really key in our region for solar PV systems. And just to be brief here is that, of course, when you look at that graph, we have that line that indicates the poverty line. On the left side, anyone falling on the left side, usually in the region, is difficult. It's difficult for that person to be able even to afford to buy the very cheapest of the systems. Those who are slightly above the poverty line in the region, they're able to afford, but in many cases they afford low-priced products. And these are the people who are entering the lower tiers of the solar PV systems. So as the income level increases, then they're able to even get high quality and larger systems, sometimes pushing them to be independent of the grid. And you find some of them also the higher income levels, they fully depend on the grid with just stabilization of their power from solar. So generally, affordability of solar home system is key constraint, and those usually who lack the ability to pay, we can say they have only two options. One is to purchase lower functionality PICO units that they can be able to afford, or they purchase a low-cost off-brand generic system that, of course, their finances is able to allow them purchase. So leading operators usually sell to upper markets with the low-income population and able to afford usually their products, and this has been the trend also. We have operators who have targeted market, they target higher market or lower market. So usually the rest are left to buy low quality product, not from sometimes from leading operators. And of course, the high cost of to produce service sometimes means many households also are unable to afford, because also it's attached to the price. The service that is provided is attached to the price. So just towards the end is that we still have some challenges in the region, generally categorized in these 6 broad categories. I've kept on talking of finances. Access to finance is really an enabler to greater adoption of solar PV systems in our region, or even coming up with the new financial model or novel financial models that can be able to allow many access this system. So access to local credit or debit financing is quite critical, because sometimes foreign finance becomes expensive because of other factors that are attached to it. So government policies are also quite important in terms of enabling the market. When the tax regimes are very clear, then it becomes easy. But more often than not, sometimes you find the tax regimes are not clear in our region, and makes it quite difficult for even investors to make bigger procurement from outside, so that because sometimes it's unclear on the policy and regulatory aspects. Productive use is an area that really needs to be stressed, and so that people can start using the solar PV energy from the solar PV, electricity from solar PV, to improve their livelihoodness. So research for productive use technology is less developed, especially for solar home systems and mini grid systems. So we need to have some ways that we can also enhance this so that more can be achieved in that space. I've also mentioned of specific type of brands. You find that standards also are not clear, or sometimes we lack standards for solar PV systems. And even the countries that have standards, then we find there are a lot of loopholes on enforcement, then making the market still be flooded with low quality products, and this really is not attractive for better adoption of solar PV systems. Then again, I mentioned that most of the best distribution systems are mostly in populated areas, so we still need to reach the unserved population. So better structures, better business models needs to come up so that this can actually be achieved. And then, of course, aspect of capacity building is quite important. That yeah, most businesses sometimes they struggle because of lack of qualified experts, and sometimes they are forced to pay high cost even to get experts from outside. So building a local capacity can really help us to leverage that. And this is not just on technical, it's also on financial aspect, and getting, of course, experts who are able to develop programs that or projects that can attract finances still becomes a challenge in our region. So it's an area that we really need to improve on. Yeah, as I mentioned, Fred from IACRI, and this is a center that the East African partner states saw it important to create, so that it can serve as a platform for collaboration for renewable energy and energy efficiency. And this includes solar PV. In these 5 main principles, areas of mandate, that the center is really working hard to see that we are able to improve and increase adoption of solar PV in our region through policy, regional policy harmonization, and also supporting individual countries to create an enabling environment for better adoption of these systems. Capacity building also is an area that we are trying to build in our region in collaboration with key partners in this area to improve both technical and also other areas that requires capacity enhancement. We also work with the institution that does research to be able to provide up-to-date information, and also run our own research system within the region, so that we're able to identify how best to use solar PV systems. Investment promotion is also one of the region areas that we work on to match investors and also investment potential areas, and also doing knowledge management by sharing information, so that investors and people in the region can be able to easily get information they so need, so that they can upscale their activities. So the center reports to the East African Sectoral Council on Energy, which of course they have their own system up to the summit. So generally, as I mentioned, that solar PV market is still on the growing trend, with the solar home system and PICO or near maturity, and just coming up is the utility scale together with the mini grid systems in the East African community. So I think I will end there, having taken quite longer time. I think I will submit back to the moderator.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fred. I think I'll now hand over to Antoine to start Q&A.
Yes, we had quite a number of questions. Maybe we can select some and answer some questions that were asked from the participants. We had a nice question from Avinash about the cost of solar PV. The question was, will the cost of solar PV modules will reduce or will get saturated at 25 cents per watt peak? That's a very nice question and very difficult to answer as it's a future estimation. What we can say that is the crystalline silicon modules costs are heavily dependent on oil demand. So it's very difficult to predict the global crystalline silicon cells with a lot of constraints about oil supply and oil demand. But what we analyze is for the global solar PV market is that it will get saturated a little bit lower than 25 cents. And the prospections are that new technologies such as from the third generation, such as perovskite, are very promising system cost reductions in terms of PV module costs. So if we can develop these kind of technologies, the costs in the next decades can be reduced further on, at least twice that the cost of PV modules today. There are other questions. Maybe Fred, you want to answer the questions about East African market or more local market? I don't know, Fred, if you can read the questions.
Maybe if you could post them here. If the moderator could post them, then I can be able to read.
Fred, I'll just send you some quick instructions offline on how to access the Q&A session. But perhaps in the interim, while I do that, one of the questions is about the sustainability of solar home systems for the long term. Perhaps if you had some thoughts on that.
So that is directed to me. Yeah, sure. Solar home systems have been quite important, especially in providing the so needed electricity in our market. The only challenge we had previously with the solar home system is that the installations that were done initially were not done the right way. Yeah. So you find that most of the solar home systems which were installed with experts who did not quite understand the way of installation and all that, most of them, they did not work because there are quite a number of parameters that makes them sustainable, especially in terms of provision of the so needed electricity. Among them is how you design the solar home system. Then, of course, other financial factors also play in, going down to also how these solar home systems are operated and maintained. So it's quite varied. The sustainability aspect is it's an integration of all this. That if you get them right, then of course, you get value out of it. So I don't know if Antoine, you'll want to add something on that. Yeah.
No, it was clear, perfectly clear. There was another question of off-grid system prices as opposed to local tariff system from the grid. That's also an interesting question, comparing the LCOE of small system to the local tariff grid to see if it's economically interesting to invest in such mini grid. With the question that if the national grid reaches the location, how to deal with these economic differences. If we take the LCOE of a small system, I would say that the LCOE varies from 10 cents to 20 cents per kilowatt hour. Maybe a little bit more if it's a smaller home system. So it might be around the local tariff systems. But the idea of this system is really to overcome the lack of grid. So of course we have to make sure that future plan of the national grid of local grid are not part of this local development. I don't know, Fred, if you have other inputs about grid access with regards to the LCOE of system, if we can afford tariff local tariff system grid.
I think you said it, Antoine, but now for our region, you find that generally solar PV systems have been used, especially in areas that are hard to reach through grid extension. And in a smaller capacity, we have seen solar PV systems used as a backup system, especially these small ones, just for those who are connected to the grid that they can use. The price comparison generally comes especially at the initial investment cost. It's quite high when you want a system, solar PV system, that will give you the similar utility as what you will earn from the grid power. So you sometimes end up spending quite a lot as the initial cost, and of course, naturally, you'll find that the price is high. And of course, areas again that the government has not put in regulations to try and provide some subsidies, tax incentives to some of these solar PV systems, then the price, of course, the unit price generally goes high. So it's a combination of all these as well. But in general comparison, of course, smaller system unit cost of power is generally higher than the grid system.
And yes, Fred, we had another question concerning East African market. It was specifically dedicated to Burkina Faso. And the question was, I have heard about affordable housing projects developed in countries such as Burkina Faso. Is housing and energy generation promoted together in East Africa? Concerning Burkina Faso.
Yeah, this is dependent on the country, because currently in the East Africa we don't have a regional policy that covers uniformly all the countries. Each country, they have their own structures that they follow when it comes to like for affordable housing. This is a program specifically, I can say, in our region that is one of the agenda in Kenya. They're promoting affordable housing so that most of the people can be able to access housing. And when you look at the components that are incorporated, then solar PV is not also part of the component that has been put there, but solar thermal is. that so long as you are putting up a structure that you can use over 100 liters of water in a day, then you need to install a solar water heating system, but not necessarily a solar PV system. So it is varied again per country. So I think that's my submission.
Yeah, I think we have answered most of the questions. I might have a look if we have new ones. We have a question also about the cost of PV modules. That is the price about $25 per watt peak? Is it good quality module or bad quality modules? The fact that we have to remember is that this price is the global market price of modules. So when you buy a PV modules from a factory, you might have a little higher price than this market price. So if you buy a 300 watt peak modules, it will be around 75 euros to 100 euros, but it's still good quality modules. You still have to check if the world norm are written on the data sheet of the modules. Also questions about PERC technologies. I am not an expert in specific PV module technologies, so I cannot answer these questions, but maybe Fred, you have some inputs. Do you know much about PERC technologies, PV modules?
Sorry, Anton, I didn't get your question.
Have you some inputs to give to the participants about PERC module technology, PERC? This is quite specific, and maybe I can let you know that we have other ISA webinar that will focus on PV technologies, and we can give you some inputs on this specific questions as well. So do not hesitate to follow the next webinars. We will get into details about these questions also. That was maybe the transition for you, Fiona.
Fantastic, Antoine. Thank you so much to both you and Fred for your time today. I'm sure our audience has found it as interesting and as I have. To let our audience know, this is just the first of many webinars. Apologies. This is just the first of many webinars that we'll be putting on over the coming months. So continue to follow us on our social media platforms. Continue to check back in on the Eventbrite page. We'll be having more webinars very shortly, and we will also be sending links to the resources from today to those who attended. I'd also like to take this opportunity to draw your attention to the ISA Infopedia, which can be found ISAINFOPEDIA.org, and this is a one-stop shop for all things solar, with country profiles, with a directory, and with lots of fantastic resources. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to highlight that platform, as we'll be using it to share resources going forward. Thanks again to all, and we look forward to you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. for your time.
Thank you all for participating.